The night had settled into a calm, almost serene quiet, but the events of the evening left a lingering tension in the air. The two men, now fully exposed, were under control, and the gravity of their mistake weighed heavily on them. Their false authority had crumbled completely, replaced by fear and uncertainty. From inside, he continued to observe, ensuring that they complied fully with his instructions until law enforcement arrived. His patience and strategic approach had prevented a potentially dangerous situation from escalating into violence. As the minutes passed, the distant sound of approaching sirens announced the arrival of official law enforcement. The men outside became visibly more anxious, their attempts to appear composed failing as the reality of their actions sank in. He remained calm, his presence steady and commanding. The arrival of backup was the final piece in ensuring the situation would end safely and decisively. He knew that every detail mattered, and he stayed fully aware of the dynamics in the driveway, monitoring the men's movements and responses. The officers approached carefully, noting the two men and the controlled scene. He identified himself clearly, confirming his position and providing credentials to the arriving team. The law enforcement officers quickly assessed the situation, understanding that the threat had been neutralized through skill, observation, and authority rather than force. The men outside were detained, their false badges and aggressive behavior documented. He remained calm, cooperating fully while maintaining vigilance, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. Once the men were secured and the officers had taken control, he took a moment to reflect on the evening. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity and accomplishment. He had faced a dangerous situation with composure and intelligence, turning the tables on individuals who had underestimated him. His training and experience had been crucial in navigating the encounter safely. The neighborhood, once a scene of potential chaos, had been returned to its peaceful state without unnecessary conflict. He thought about the lessons of the night. Vigilance, patience, and preparation had been his greatest allies. The importance of observing without immediate reaction, of understanding the motivations and behaviors of others, and of maintaining calm under pressure had all proven invaluable. The men outside had acted recklessly, relying on assumptions and false authority. Their errors had been their downfall, and his careful strategy had ensured that justice was maintained while avoiding unnecessary harm. As he returned to his home, he reflected on the impact of their actions and the importance of community awareness. The neighborhood had been quiet and safe, but vigilance was always necessary. He considered sharing insights with neighbors, emphasizing the importance of observing unusual behavior and reporting it to authorities. The night had highlighted how assumptions, prejudice, and recklessness could create dangerous situations, and how careful observation and composure could prevent escalation. He also thought about the personal aspect of the encounter. His family's safety had been a priority, and his actions had ensured that no harm came to them. The sense of responsibility weighed heavily, but was balanced by the satisfaction of handling the situation effectively. He had maintained control, protected those he cared about, and ensured that the law was upheld. The psychological advantage he had used had prevented the men from acting recklessly, demonstrating the power of preparation and strategy over brute force. As the officers completed their procedures, he reviewed the sequence of events in his mind. Every step he had taken, every observation, every decision had contributed to the safe resolution. The men had been confident, arrogant, and dangerous, but his calm, calculated approach had dismantled their advantage. The experience reinforced his belief that composure, intelligence, and strategic thinking could overcome even the most audacious threats. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of training, awareness, and patience. He considered the broader implications of the evening. The encounter had highlighted issues of prejudice and false authority, showing how assumptions based on race and appearance could lead to dangerous behavior. His experience demonstrated that preparation, skill, and intelligence could neutralize such threats effectively. He felt a renewed commitment to educating others about vigilance, awareness, and the importance of responding thoughtfully rather than impulsively. The lessons extended beyond the driveway and into the community, emphasizing responsibility, safety, and respect for the law. In the aftermath, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The adrenaline had subsided, leaving a clear mind and a sense of accomplishment. He had faced a situation that could have escalated into violence, but had navigated it with precision and composure. The men had been detained, the neighborhood remained safe, and the principles he had relied upon, observation, patience, and strategic action, had been validated. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that his skills had prevented harm and upheld justice. He walked through his home, checking on his family and making sure that everyone was safe and calm. The encounter had been intense, but it had also reinforced his commitment to protecting those he cared about. He shared a quiet conversation with his family, emphasizing the importance of vigilance, calmness, and clear thinking in unexpected situations. The experience had strengthened his resolve, reminding him of the power of preparation, training, and mental clarity. Later, he reflected on the psychological aspects of the encounter. The men had relied on intimidation, false authority, and assumptions. They had underestimated him completely, failing to recognize that composure, intelligence, and observation could counter their aggression. He understood that the power of calmness and strategy often outweighed physical force. His approach had neutralized the threat, maintained control, and ensured a safe outcome. The lessons of patience, awareness, and calculated action were clear and memorable. He also thought about the importance of community awareness. The neighborhood had been calm, but vigilance was necessary to maintain safety. He considered ways to educate others subtly, sharing insights about observing unusual behavior and understanding the dynamics of potentially dangerous situations. His experience had shown that proactive awareness, combined with skill and composure, could prevent harm and ensure that justice was upheld. It was a reminder of the responsibility each individual carried in maintaining safety and order. As the night deepened, he allowed himself to relax slightly, feeling a sense of closure. The men had been dealt with, the neighborhood remained safe, and his family was unharmed. He had demonstrated the power of preparation, observation, and calm authority. The events of the evening would remain a vivid memory, a testament to the importance of vigilance, intelligence, and strategic thinking. He felt a sense of quiet pride, knowing that he had faced danger with composure and had emerged in control. He took a final look around the driveway, the street, and the quiet neighborhood. The incident had revealed the fragility of assumptions, the dangers of false authority, and the importance of careful observation. His actions had prevented harm, ensured justice, and maintained the peace. He reflected on the balance between vigilance and calm, realizing that true strength lay in the ability to observe, plan, and act thoughtfully. The night had tested him, but he had passed with skill and composure. Finally, he settled into his home, the tension of the evening giving way to quiet satisfaction. He had navigated a dangerous situation without unnecessary conflict, using intelligence, patience, and calm authority. The men had been exposed, law enforcement had taken control, and the neighborhood remained safe. The experience had reinforced the importance of training, observation, and strategic action. It was a night that would remain in his memory, a testament to the power of composure, skill, and thoughtful response in the face of danger. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue his life with vigilance, awareness, and confidence, knowing that preparedness and calmness could overcome even the most unexpected challenges. The tension in the driveway had reached a tipping point. The two men were now visibly shaken, their false confidence slipping as they realized the situation was no longer under their control. They glanced at each other nervously, unsure of what to do next. Their aggressive posturing had begun to falter, replaced by uncertainty and fear. From inside, he could see it all, every movement, every flicker of doubt in their eyes. He had waited for this moment, carefully observing, calculating, and now he was ready to act. He stepped into view, his presence calm but commanding. The porch light highlighted his stance, and his eyes met theirs with a steady, unwavering gaze. The shift in energy was immediate. The men froze, realizing that they were facing someone who was fully aware of their intentions and perfectly capable of responding. Their false badges, their aggressive words, all became meaningless in the presence of authority that could not be challenged. He spoke clearly, his tone firm, leaving no room for argument. It was the voice of someone trained to command a situation, not just react to it. One of the men tried to regain control, reaching for his jacket as if to brandish a weapon or assert authority. He shook his head slowly, signaling that such attempts would be futile. He could see the panic building in their faces, the rapid eye movements. the shallow breathing, the hesitation in their stance. They had assumed that fear would dictate the encounter, but instead they were confronted with composure, skill, and confidence. This was a turning point. The power dynamic had shifted completely. He began to reveal his credentials, moving with deliberate care to ensure that the display was clear and undeniable. The men's reactions were immediate. Their eyes widened in shock and disbelief. They had targeted the wrong person. They had underestimated him in every possible way. The realization hit them like a sudden cold wave, and for the first time, they understood the gravity of their mistake. He remained calm, letting the weight of their error sink in, knowing that their fear was now a tool he could use. The man closest to the gate froze in place, his hand half raised as if unsure whether to flee or stay. The other man took a step back, glancing around, looking for an escape. Their communication faltered. They were no longer acting in sync. He had anticipated this, knowing that exposure and clear authority would disrupt their coordination. He continued speaking, calm but firm, explaining his position in a way that left no room for doubt. Every word reinforced his control over the situation. Every gesture emphasized his readiness. He could see the fear now dominating their expressions. It was no longer masked by bravado or fake authority. They were realizing that they were in a dangerous position, outmatched not by physical strength alone but by intelligence, training, and composure. He stayed in control, measuring each step, each word. His presence alone was enough to make them hesitate, to disrupt any thought of aggression or escape without guidance. He maintained the upper hand with patience, careful observation, and strategic positioning. The night air carried their shallow breathing, their whispered attempts at planning, their uncertainty. He listened carefully, noting every detail. Even in their panic, they revealed their own weaknesses, their lack of coordination, their reliance on false assumptions. Every mistake they made reinforced his control. He moved slightly, signaling subtle but undeniable authority. The shift was complete. The predators had become the hunted, not physically, but psychologically. They were trapped by their own errors and his careful, deliberate actions. He began to assert more direct control, guiding them verbally, instructing them to remain still and comply. His voice carried weight, clarity, and command. The men obeyed, though reluctantly, because they understood instinctively that resistance would not end well. They were entirely unprepared for someone who could read the situation so precisely, someone who could remain calm while they faltered. It was a demonstration of skill and restraint, a controlled response to a dangerous scenario that they had triggered. He kept observing, noting their body language, their attempts to appear calm while internally panicking. One man's hand twitched near his belt. The other's eyes darted toward the street as if considering fleeing. He allowed these actions to play out, knowing that the display of authority and the exposure of their own mistakes would maintain control without any need for unnecessary confrontation. Patience and clarity were his tools, and he wielded them expertly. Then he took another step, slowly, deliberately, to establish a clear visual of his authority. He maintained eye contact, ensuring they understood that every move they made was being observed and assessed. Their fear intensified, and he could see it influencing their behavior, making them more compliant and hesitant. This was exactly what he needed: control through presence, observation, and psychological dominance. The balance of power had shifted, completely in his favor, and he was in total command of the situation. He spoke again, calmly, explaining the consequences of their actions without raising his voice. He outlined that their attempts to intimidate were futile, and that any further aggression would result in immediate legal action. The clarity and authority in his words left them no room to respond aggressively. They were trapped by their own misjudgment, facing someone who was both legally and physically prepared to manage the threat. Their panic grew as they realized that their assumptions had been entirely wrong. One of the men moved slightly, trying to reach for his car, perhaps to escape. He shook his head firmly, signaling that any attempt to leave would be noticed and controlled. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable. They had underestimated the quiet man in the house, assuming compliance and intimidation would work. Instead, they were confronted by preparation, skill, and authority. Every instinct they had relied upon to dominate the situation had failed. He had observed, waited, and now he was in full control. He continued to assert his presence, moving strategically around the porch, keeping their attention focused on him. Every motion was deliberate, every gesture calculated. The men were unsteady, their coordination breaking down as they realized that they had no advantage. The air was thick with tension, but he remained calm, the center of stability and authority. He knew that his calmness would be the most powerful tool in controlling the encounter and ensuring a safe resolution. He could see the shift in their posture, the way they had begun to shrink under the weight of their error. Their confidence had evaporated, replaced by panic, hesitation, and uncertainty. They glanced at each other, attempting to communicate, but their words faltered. He allowed this to continue, maintaining psychological control without aggression. Their fear, their confusion, was now his instrument, guiding them toward compliance and safety. Finally, he fully revealed his identity and credentials, making it clear that he was an FBI agent and that their actions were illegal and dangerous. Their reactions were immediate and intense. Shock, disbelief, and fear were evident in every movement and expression. They understood in that moment the gravity of their mistake. He did not raise his voice or act rashly. Instead, he relied on the authority of his position and the calm, deliberate manner in which he had managed the situation. This was far more powerful than force or threat. The men, now clearly aware of their error, took cautious steps backward. They began to comply fully, following his instructions without hesitation. The tension in the air shifted, from the unpredictability of confrontation to controlled resolution. He maintained focus, ensuring that they could not regain any sense of control or escape without his acknowledgement. The psychological advantage remained firmly in his hands. He knew that this measured approach would prevent unnecessary conflict while ensuring that justice was maintained. As the night continued, he guided them toward surrendering their false credentials and staying in place until law enforcement backup could arrive. His presence, authority, and composure had neutralized the threat. The men were no longer in a position to intimidate or act recklessly. Every movement, every decision had been calculated, turning the tables on those who had tried to assert power through intimidation. His patience, training, and calm under pressure had ensured that the situation would end safely and decisively. The neighborhood remained quiet, the soft glow of streetlights casting shadows over the driveway. The men had been exposed, their false authority dismantled, and they were now fully under control. He remained vigilant, observing their behavior, ensuring compliance until backup arrived. The ordeal had been intense, but his preparation and composure had turned what could have been a dangerous encounter into a controlled, decisive resolution. He stood in the porch light, calm, observant, and fully in command, demonstrating that skill, patience, and intelligence could overcome even the most audacious threats. He had waited patiently, observing every move, every gesture, every shift in tension. From the safety of his home, he could see that the two men outside were growing increasingly frustrated. Their arrogance was starting to crack under the weight of uncertainty. They believed that they were in control, that their fake badges and aggressive words would make anyone comply. They did not know who they were dealing with. They had made a critical mistake by targeting the wrong person, and he was ready to turn that mistake into an advantage. He moved quietly to a spot where he could see both the men and the surrounding street. The faint glow of the porch light illuminated the driveway, making their silhouettes clear. One of them fidgeted with his jacket, the other scanned the perimeter nervously. He could see that they were unsure of each other, their confidence eroding with every passing second. He felt a surge of clarity, knowing that patience and careful observation had given him a significant advantage. They assumed fear, but he had none. He had training, experience, and a calm mind. He began to plan his response. He did not want unnecessary violence, but he was ready to act decisively if they tried to force the issue. He could see how they handled their supposed authority, and it was all based on pretense. Their movements were predictable, and he noted each one, preparing for the moment when he would assert control. He thought about the principles he had learned in his career, Observation, patience, timing, and strategic action. Every detail mattered, and he had cataloged them all. The men started moving closer to the gate again, speaking in low but urgent tones. One of them raised a hand, gesturing for the other to be quiet. He could hear snippets of their conversation, their frustration evident in the clipped words and sharp tones. They were trying to figure out why there was no immediate response, why the house remained quiet. They did not know that their target was fully alert, analyzing them with precision and preparing for the next move. Their assumptions had blinded them to reality. He thought about his options carefully. He could reveal his presence, use the element of surprise, or continue observing to gain even more insight. The right choice depended on timing, and he trusted his instincts. He moved to another window, checking the positions of the men once again. They were walking back and forth, unsure, their posture shifting between aggression and hesitation. He could see the faint tremor in one man's hand and the rapid blink of the other's eyes. These small signs told him everything he needed to know about their mindset. The night air was cool and still, carrying distant sounds of traffic and occasional dogs barking. It was a quiet neighborhood, and the contrast between the calm surroundings and the tension in his driveway made the situation feel surreal. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Every second mattered. Every decision could change the outcome. He reminded himself to stay calm, to rely on his training, and to act only when he had maximum control. He recalled previous situations from his career. Not exactly the same, but similar in terms of danger and unpredictability. Those memories reinforced his confidence. He had faced people who underestimated him before, people who assumed that intimidation would work. In every instance, he had relied on observation, patience, and careful planning to turn the tables. This was no different. He was ready. One of the men moved to the side of the car, pretending to check something while keeping his eyes on the house. The other stayed near the gate, shifting his weight from one foot to another, his posture tense. They were trying to maintain the illusion of control, but it was failing. He could see the hesitation in their steps, the quick glances they exchanged, the subtle signs of uncertainty. They were unraveling, and he had not yet even revealed his presence. He began to speak softly under his breath, as if talking to himself, reviewing the plan. He needed to remain calm, confident, and deliberate. Every action had to be precise. He thought about how to assert control without escalating unnecessary conflict. His training emphasized the importance of psychological advantage. If he could make them realize that their assumptions were wrong, that they were no longer in control, they would lose composure, and he would have the upper hand. The men outside were still unaware. They were focused on their own agenda, assuming that he would react predictably. He watched as one of them stepped closer to the gate, reaching out as if to knock. The other muttered something under his breath, scanning the yard. He could see the tension building, the uncertainty growing. It was the perfect moment to act strategically, to reveal his awareness in a way that would make them hesitate, even panic. He moved to the center of the room, where he could be seen if necessary, but still had control over the environment. He made sure that his movements were calm and deliberate, signaling confidence. He wanted them to feel a shift in the energy, to sense that their assumptions were no longer valid. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and prepared for the moment when he would reveal his true position and authority. As he positioned himself, he thought about the words he would use, the tone, the timing. He needed to convey authority without unnecessary aggression. He considered the sequence: reveal credentials, assert control, and neutralize the threat. Every step had to be precise. He could see the men shifting again, their impatience growing. They had no idea what was coming. Their sense of control was fragile, and he was about to shatter it completely. He finally moved closer to the window, making sure he could see both men clearly. He waited until the one near the gate reached a point where he could be observed without danger. Then he spoke, his voice calm, steady, and firm. The words carried authority, and the tone was unmistakable. The men froze, their movements halting as they processed the unexpected situation. They had assumed fear, but they were confronted with composure and confidence. One of the men reached for his badge again, perhaps trying to reinforce their false authority. He shook his head slightly, signaling that their attempts at intimidation were ineffective. His gaze was steady, observing their reactions. waiting for the moment when he could fully assert control. He saw the hesitation, the uncertainty, the flicker of fear in their eyes. They were beginning to realize that their assumptions had been completely wrong. He continued speaking calmly but firmly, making it clear that he was fully aware of their actions and their intentions. The effect was immediate. The men looked at each other, confusion and panic creeping in. They had no idea that they were facing someone trained to handle exactly this kind of situation. Their arrogance was melting away, replaced by uncertainty. He maintained his composure, letting them feel the shift in balance without taking unnecessary risks. The night seemed to hold its breath, the quiet of the neighborhood contrasting sharply with the tension in the driveway. He felt a surge of clarity and focus. He was not just observing, he was in control. The men outside had underestimated him completely. They assumed that fear and aggression would dominate the encounter, but they were wrong. He had patience, training, and strategy on his side. He prepared mentally for the next steps, thinking about how to fully neutralize the threat without escalating violence. He considered every detail, positions, potential escape routes, objects that could be used defensively, and the reactions of the men. He stayed calm, confident, and deliberate, knowing that control came from awareness and strategic action. The night had transformed from ordinary to extraordinary, and he was ready to meet it with skill, intelligence, and calm determination. The men outside had stepped closer to the driveway, and their movements had grown bolder. They walked with a sense of authority that did not belong to them, their fake badges glinting under the dim streetlights. They spoke to each other in harsh whispers, pointing at the house and occasionally glancing over their shoulders as if they expected someone to notice them. From inside, he observed every detail with precision, analyzing their body language, trying to understand what they intended. They were confident, but he could see the cracks in their composure. Overconfidence had a way of exposing people who did not know what they were really doing. He noticed the way they handled themselves, their gestures exaggerated, their steps calculated. Each of them tried to appear dominant, but there was a subtle hesitation, a nervous energy that they could not fully hide. He made a mental note of their positions, the objects around them, and the potential risks. From the safety of his home, he could see more than they realized. Every shadow, every movement mattered, and he committed them all to memory. He did not want to confront them yet. He needed to understand their plan, their level of danger, and how to control the situation before it escalated. The two men had stopped near the gate, and one of them spoke in a loud, commanding voice, demanding that someone come outside. His tone was aggressive, meant to intimidate, but it lacked conviction. The other man fidgeted, glancing at the surroundings as if expecting trouble. He could see the fear in their eyes, even as they tried to mask it with false authority. He knew that real power did not come from uniforms or badges. It came from understanding the situation and being prepared. He had that power, and they did not. He moved quietly to a corner of the room where he had a better view of the driveway and the front yard. He could see their faces more clearly now, noting the tension in their shoulders, the nervous twitch in one man's hand, the way they scanned for witnesses. It was almost comical if it weren't so dangerous. They were strangers, out of place and utterly unaware that they were being observed by someone trained to recognize threats and react efficiently. He felt a mix of focus and calm determination. This was his element. It was a test of patience, observation, and careful planning, and he was ready. The men were speaking into their radios, but he could see they were not expecting a challenge. They assumed he would comply or be intimidated, and they were confident that fear would make him obey. He had learned long ago that fear could be misleading. People often act recklessly when they overestimate their control over others. They did not know he had been trained for situations exactly like this. He could use their arrogance against them. It was a small advantage, but one that could make all the difference. One of the men took a step closer to the gate, peering through the iron bars as if trying to spot a reaction. His eyes scanned the yard, moving from corner to corner, seeking any sign of a threat. The other man's hands rested near his pockets, fingers twitching, betraying his unease. They were pretending to be in control, but he could see the uncertainty lurking beneath the surface. He did not rush to act. He observed, calculated, and prepared. Patience was his ally, and he had plenty of it. He thought about the right way to approach the situation. And he did not want to provoke violence, but he also could not allow strangers to intimidate him on his property. He weighed his options, considering every possible scenario. From his vantage point, he could see the driveway, the car, and the men's positions. Every step they took was predictable, because they were relying on false authority rather than skill. He could anticipate their moves, and that gave him confidence. Suddenly, one of the men reached for something in his jacket. He froze, watching every motion. His training kicked in, and he analyzed the situation in milliseconds. It could be a weapon, a phone, or some other tool. Either way, he needed to be ready. He moved slowly toward another window, keeping himself hidden but making sure he could respond if necessary. He could feel his heart rate steady, his mind sharp. The danger was real, but he was not afraid. Fear was a tool for those who did not know how to handle it. He knew how. The men spoke again, their voices carrying a mix of authority and irritation. They were trying to assert control, but the cracks in their confidence were becoming more evident. They did not see the man inside, calm and fully aware of their presence. They assumed he was unaware, vulnerable, and easy to intimidate. That assumption would be their undoing. He felt a sense of focus and clarity, knowing that he could turn the situation to his advantage if he remained patient and deliberate. He considered the layout of his home, the exits and the objects he could use for protection if necessary. He did not want a confrontation, but he was prepared for one. The men outside were unaware of his abilities and training. They did not know that the quiet man observing them could respond with precision and strategy. That ignorance gave him power, a hidden advantage that he intended to use wisely. Time seemed to stretch as he continued to observe. The men moved closer to the house, their gestures growing more impatient. One of them knocked lightly on the gate, then tried to peer over the fence. They were testing boundaries, attempting to assert dominance. He noted the license plates, the car's condition, and their mannerisms. Every detail could be important. He was building a mental map of the situation, a plan that would allow him to control the outcome. He thought about his family and neighbors, imagining their reactions if things went wrong. That thought reinforced his resolve. He could not let the situation escalate unnecessarily. He needed to act strategically, using observation, intelligence, and patience. The men outside had underestimated him completely, assuming that fear or compliance would govern his response. They did not know who he really was, and that ignorance was their vulnerability. He picked up his phone and considered calling for help, but decided against it. He wanted to wait until he had a complete understanding of the situation. Acting too soon could give away his position or provoke an unnecessary confrontation. He stayed calm, monitoring every movement, listening for any changes in tone or behavior. The men were growing restless, their impatience evident, but he remained composed, focused on the plan that was forming in his mind. One of the men began to speak more loudly, trying to force a reaction. He kept his distance, observing, making mental notes about the words, the tone, and the underlying intentions. They were testing him, trying to provoke a response, and he did not give them one. Instead, he stayed silent, allowing their frustration to build. He knew that patience could break their composure faster than any confrontation. He continued to watch, analyzing every nuance, waiting for the right moment to assert control. The night air grew cooler, and the soft glow of streetlights cast long shadows across the yard. The men's outlines were sharp against the dim light, their movements becoming more erratic as their confidence waned. He saw the tension in their shoulders, the flicker of doubt in their eyes, and he knew that they were beginning to realize that this was not an ordinary situation. They did not know that he was trained to handle threats, to observe without being seen, and to act decisively when necessary. He moved quietly, positioning himself where he could monitor both the driveway and the surrounding area. He kept his mind focused on the men's movements, noting every small detail that could provide insight into their intentions. He understood that control of the situation came from awareness and patience, not haste. He had learned that lesson over years of experience, and he applied it now with complete concentration. The men began to argue quietly, one questioning the other's judgment. Their disagreements were subtle but telling. They were trying to maintain a facade of authority, but their coordination was failing. He could see the cracks forming, and he knew that the right action at the right time could shift the balance entirely in his favor. He remained calm, observing, waiting for the precise moment when he could act without unnecessary risk. He thought about his options, the sequence of actions that would allow him to maintain control and protect his home. He had a plan forming based on observation, intelligence, and readiness. Every detail mattered. He knew that the men had underestimated him, and that gave him the confidence to remain patient. The night was still young, and the confrontation had not yet begun, but he was ready for whatever came next. The two men outside continued to search, unaware that their movements were being watched and analyzed. They assumed they had the upper hand, but in reality, they were walking into a situation where every step they took was anticipated. He felt a sense of focus and calm, knowing that he could control the outcome through observation, patience, and strategic action. The night was tense, but he remained composed, ready for the moment when he would assert control and reveal the truth they could never have expected. He had always liked the quiet of his neighborhood, the kind of quiet that wrapped around the houses like a soft blanket, where people waved at each other over fences, and the hum of traffic was distant enough to be soothing rather than annoying. He had worked hard to get here, to build a life that balanced his professional responsibilities with personal peace. After long hours at work, there was something comforting about sitting on his porch in the evening, watching the sun dip behind the trees and feeling the gentle breeze that carried the scents of freshly mown grass and blooming flowers. Tonight, like many others, he found himself in that familiar place, sipping a cup of tea and letting the weight of the day slowly melt away. It had been an ordinary day, filled with the kind of tasks that demanded focus but not panic. He liked routine. It helped him stay grounded. He had risen early, gone through his workout, and then spent the day at his office reviewing cases, meeting with colleagues, and handling paperwork. Each task had its challenges, but they were challenges he was trained for and ready to face. He had always believed that preparation and calm thinking could defuse almost any problem, and his life had been a testament to that philosophy. Even though his job required him to stay alert and ready for anything, he never let it consume him. The evenings at home were sacred, a time to breathe and remember that life was more than work. He had finished his tea and set the cup down on the table beside him. The evening was growing cooler, and he pulled a light jacket around his shoulders. From the corner of his eye, he noticed movement at the edge of his driveway. At first he thought it was just a neighbor walking by or someone taking a shortcut, but something about the way the figure moved made him pause. It wasn't the usual casual stroll. There was a purpose, a confidence that didn't belong in a quiet neighborhood like this. He stood up, squinting through the dimming light, trying to make out the details. Two men had pulled up in a car that didn't look quite right, the kind of car that didn't belong in the driveway unless it had business there. They were wearing dark uniforms and badges, but something felt off. The badges glinted in the fading light, but they didn't shine with the authenticity he was used to seeing. He had learned over the years to notice these things, small details that could make all the difference. He took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. He had faced difficult situations before, situations that demanded his attention and his best judgment. This could be nothing, a harmless mistake or a prank, but his instincts, finely tuned from years of experience, told him to pay close attention. He watched as the men approached his house, speaking to each other in low voices that carried a sharp edge of tension. The way they moved, the way they scanned the surroundings, it all suggested they had a target in mind. He moved inside quietly, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to assess the situation from a safe vantage point. From the window, he could see their actions more clearly. They were pretending to examine the neighborhood, but their focus was on his house. They spoke to each other in clipped tones, their gestures sharp and deliberate. He noted the license plate on their car, the way their shoes scuffed the pavement, the subtle inconsistencies in their uniforms. Every detail mattered, and he committed them all to memory. Despite the tension building in the back of his mind, he maintained an outward calm. He didn't want to reveal his awareness too soon. Part of his training was learning to observe without letting the subject know they were being watched. It was a skill that had kept him safe many times before. He moved to another window, getting a better angle to see the car and the men's movements. They were speaking into radios, but there was no urgency in